So we're going to start out with the 4 causes. It's a real quick, 1, 2, 3, 4, but it was supposed to be the end of the last lecture, and we didn't get to it. And because you know what the 4 causes are supposed to do, what do the 4 causes cause? Do you remember? What is it that they cause? A what? A change. If you don't have one of the causes, there's no change. So now we're going to apply that same understanding to the sacrament of marriage. So you could just write down the material, the formal, the efficient, and the final. And I'll tell you what they are. And then on the last slide, when we start talking about divorce and annulments, I'll be able to put it in the context of these 4 causes. And then whether you agree or not, you will understand it. So the material cause of the sacrament of matrimony is the mutual consent of the couple. Okay? The material cause is the mutual consent of the couple. They're giving themselves to each other freely. The mutual consent of the couple. The formal cause, let's just say it's the ritual. And just know that under ritual are vows and blessings and exchanging of the vows. So the formal cause is the ritual. The efficient cause is what, Mr. Berkey? Holy Spirit. The final cause. Mutual sanctification and salvation. Mutual sanctification and salvation. So let me just stop there a second. Of course you want to have a beautiful wedding, right? We're not saying anything needs to be bare bones. But if you start out your life with this person saying that by us coming together, we are going to make each other holy, and also together we'll be saved, and we'll have salvation because of how we bring each other into sanctity, that's not the same person that's going to say, I know, but we still want to have a wedding out by the beach. I mean, those two things don't just go together. It's because once you're at that place, you want to be at an altar. You want to be in the proper liturgical environment to celebrate this as a sacrament. We're not there as a community. Thank you.
I would have said no for you.
Student like teacher with smiley face. Okay. I knew a Fidelity was down there, so I could play this game today. All right. So anyway, we'll leave it there, and I'll talk more about that here briefly. Lifelong conjugal fidelity. We could be as cynical as we want. There's something to this. This is what the sacrament is supposed to preserve and entail and foster. So girls, if somebody were to bend their knees in front of you, ask for your hand in marriage, and then with the most earnest heart tell you how what is between us, it'll never end. This will be life. I mean, my commitment to you is not conditional on anything. If they start down that approach, you got to keep her. Right? You got to keep her. So this is a total fidelity and an unbreakable union, right? This is a total fidelity and an unbreakable union. That should bring comfort. That should bring comfort. We'll talk more about that at the bottom of this page. The family is known as the domestic church. So what that is supposed to entail is that the parents are by word and deed the first heralds of the faith. The parents are by word and deed the first heralds of the faith. In other words, I will be held accountable for how I passed on the faith to my children. I'm not going to be held accountable for how they kept the faith. I'm accountable for how I passed on the faith of my children. So what happens in our world? We have Catholics who get to high school, college, they feel emancipated, so they stop attending Mass. But they still feel like a cultural connection to the Catholic Church. So they come once in a while, and when they have their own children, they'll probably show up for the sacraments. But the problem is their children had showed up for sacraments but never really went to Mass ever, so their experience is totally different than their parents' was even. So when they grow older, they don't see any reason to go through the motions. So within 1 or 2 generations, you have people who consider themselves Christian, but in all sense and purposes are practical agnostics. That's how they live, right? My daughter, who was helping as an aide in CCD, 8th grade class, I guess there were 16 kids in there, she asked how many students here attend Mass regularly, not every holy day, just regularly. 1 kid out of 16. How many here don't even go to Mass at all? 8 kids raised their hands. Now those kids are being confirmed. Do you think they're going to go to church? And what do you think their children are going to have an experience as? So the domestic church, this is where we hear the gospel first and foremost. I don't think we should take it lightly, you know. Gift of children. Children are never a burden, ever. Okay? And it is true that it's the woman that gives birth, obviously. But then she'll have to miss more work than her husband. That's true too. But I can tell you, from being married as long as I have and have 3 children, the oldest now being 26, my wife would tell you the first 9 months, that was the easiest part of it. After that, it's both the husband and the wife. You're in this together, 100%, both of you. No 50-50s. And the things that we've experienced, you know, I never liked it. I still probably wouldn't like it. I don't do it to other people. You know, when your kids are little, wait till they start crawling. You know, when they're crawling, wait till they're walking. When they're walking, wait till they start talking, and then you got to worry about that. Oh, wait till they go to school and you hear the stories. Wait till they get older and be teenagers. Wait till they start driving. It all went down. Let me tell you, it does get worse each time. I mean, what my one daughter had to take a special formula, and it cost us almost $100 a week to feed her. Boy, would I take that payment any day now, when they whack your cars and all of a sudden you're shelling out thousands of dollars. It's 100%. You're both in. Children are a gift. I don't mean to sound cynical. The spouses cooperate with the creative work of God. Okay? The spouses cooperate with the creative work of God. Here's what I mean by that. And you guys know this because you're going to see how silly this sounds. See the pictures of my daughters up there? I'm the father of their bodies. Do you ever hear anybody talk like that? Do your parents ever introduce you as the body? Because you're an incarnate being. There's a body and a soul. Are your parents the origin of your soul? No. That means they cooperated with God. In that sense, children are gifts, right? So as long as you understand the body as being a corporate being, I'm only responsible for the physical aspects of this. I'm not responsible for the soul. So my children were cooperative acts between me, my wife, and God. Was God in the bedroom? Absolutely. All right? Absolutely. Okay. Does that freak you out a little bit? It wasn't like over in the corner or anything. Don't be weird. You know? Okay. So exclusivity. Okay, so I want you to think about this, girls. And I always point out to girls because I think they have a better sense of this than guys. We're clueless for the most part. We admit it, right? Yeah. Exclusivity. If you had somebody that looked you in the eye and said with their deepest heart, what do you...
Hey, Pat, you busy?
Yeah, I want to know.
You're
What do you
actually
need?
teaching today?
Go on. Come on.
All right. Merry Christmas. Have a Merry
Walnut
Christmas.
Valley. So, exclusivity. Could you imagine some guy telling you, you're it, these eyes will never go anywhere else, neither will this heart? You know you'd pay any sum of money for that. If somebody said to you, it's unconditional, well, you can laugh, but I hope you find that. Somebody tells you, and there's nothing you could ever do to change that. There's no conditions. My love comes without conditions. And I'm not talking they're good at saying words. I'm talking they lived this out over a few decades, right? It's permanent. So me and my wife, before we got married, what we both said to each other was the word divorce is off the table. Not the idea of divorce, the word. Never to be spoken under any conditions. Not any. We kept to that. I think total between dating and engagement like 3.5 years, 3 years. Right. So anyway, you know, and I'm not going to get into the marriage thing now, but, you know, we live in a country that's changed the definition of marriage, and my guess is most of you are okay with it. It's gone from male and female to male, male, female, female. Next semester, we're going to talk about that. There is no logical reason that if you change that, you can't change 2, and make it 3, 4. Well, see, right now, stop. Right now, in our country, we have polygamists that are in the courts making the same legal arguments that were made for LGBT. Same arguments. They are the same. If you are against having 2 or more than 2 people, I don't know on what basis you say that. Or lifelong. Why not have terms? Do we really expect people to be married forever? If it's a contract between 2 people, negotiate it. 10 years. After that, we may voluntarily renew it, or it just automatically dissolves by law. All those things, once you change one, it doesn't matter what you think or care about, you will have no logical basis to leave it there, right? So the Catholic Church says marriage preceded the state. It was here before the United States. The United States has no authority to change it. We get they do legally. I mean, that's legal is a different story. But I'm talking morally, okay? Anyway, let's move on to the last thing. Now, I know it's a terrible note to leave on here, but I'm going to try to wrap it on a good note. There's nobody here, including myself, that has not been affected by divorce, probably. It could be parents, siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, you name it, right? I'm the only sibling in my family that hasn't been divorced, remarried. Well, my one sister's not remarried. My wife, her family, her parents got divorced when she was in her mid-teens. That's typical, right? So when the child starts to get emancipated, like you don't have to take care of them anymore, right? They're kind of on their own. Oftentimes the husband and wife look at each other and they're somewhat strangers. They've never developed something between them. I know my father-in-law told us, no matter how bad off you are financially, make sure that you grow the bond between us. And we have, you know. So I know it might sound odd to you, but I actually lived in a world where there's no VCRs, you know, and nobody I knew owned it. You'd have to be rich. I mean, I knew a couple kids, but they were the rich kids. They were like $400 or $500 for a VCR player. And there was no Blockbusters. You went to the local store, and they were what they call video stores, and you had to get a membership. So if you wanted to take out a video, it might cost you $15 a year just to pay for the membership. And we would rent, so we would save up. It would about take us like 2 months. We'd save up $25, and we'd go, we'd rent a VCR, and we'd rent 2 movies. That was our date, right? So you do what you can to grow together. So my wife her parents get divorced. You could not have had a more agreeable divorce. I doubt anybody here that knows anybody that got divorced were on these terms. They simply just parted. They had to have a lawyer. I mean, there's legalities involved. But there was no arguing. There was no yelling. There was no name calling. There was no fight over anything. My wife's dad told his wife, what is it that you want? Just take whatever you need. I'll take what's left over and get what I have to. You know, I don't know how much money I have, but if you're whatever apartment you go rent, I'll help if I can, help pay. As far as the kids, where do you want to live? Well, the 2 girls want to live with mom, the son wanted to live with dad. He said, that's fine, you could do that, but you're not switching back and forth. And if you do, whatever rules mom has, they're going to be your rules here. My wife told me her and her sister would go to her dad's and start talking about her mom. Her dad would tell them to shut up. You will never talk about your mother in this house. Could you imagine that kind of divorce? You're wondering why they got divorced, right? Well, they didn't know each other. So the reality is she was dating a guy at the time. She tells me the story how she's over at his parents' house, and they're saying, you know, I feel bad for your parents going through this. And she said, I know, but it doesn't even feel like it's affecting me. It's like so benevolent. She's 50 years old now, my wife, and she says that was the most naive thing she ever said in her life. It's affected her every hour, she says. Now, what did that mean? That's not your burden. It wasn't her burden. You know, whatever your family situation is, you don't have any control over that. Neither did my wife. But when me and my wife got together, what now? We have 100% control, and so do you. So these things that I've talked about, like the fidelity, the permanence, the exclusivity, you bring those elements into your marriage, you can change the whole difference, right? Unfortunately, most people don't. Next semester, I'll teach you that the Catholic Church has no system, right? There's not like you can't do checklists. But if you follow what the church teaches, the divorce rate hovers around 4%. It's not a half bad statistic, right? So divorce then is a civil dissolution of marriage. It's a civil dissolution of marriage. And this recognizes that a marriage once existed. That might sound obvious, but we need to make that distinction. It's the civil dissolution of a marriage, and it recognizes that a marriage once existed. You entered into a contract, you're getting rid of the contract. An annulment, by contrast, is a decree that a marriage never existed. It is a decree that a marriage never existed. It is not a Catholic divorce. It is not a Catholic divorce. So if you're out and about sometime, I don't care if you're Catholic, Protestant, atheist, agnostic, and you hear somebody say, no, that's what the Catholics call them, they get divorced. No, they don't. And I'll explain why that is.
What's the last part again?
It's not a Catholic divorce, all right? It's a decree that a marriage never existed. Just as a little side note, the state will also grant annulments. My in-laws received an annulment from the state. This is not something that the Catholic Church is exclusive on. You know, if you enter into a contract, right? Let's say Sean's, you know, he's supposed to go sign a contract for this one big job or whatever. He can't go, so he sends a friend, and the friend signs his name. If they find out about that, they don't say you broke the contract. They say you never entered into it. There was none, right? That's the difference, and that's what we're talking about here. So now that you know what the material cause is, the mutual consent of the couple, we can say if that's not present, there's no marriage. And I'm not going to give you details on this because it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to give you the most obvious, even if you say, well, does that ever happen? I want to make a point. One of the issues under lack of matter could be a defect of knowledge. Something you didn't know. You married this person and then found out that wasn't their name. You guys watch Lifetime? Isn't that the basis for like every third movie on that Yale television show? You know?
Or not divorced, but an oath for that?
Well, it's a fraud. It's fraudulent, you know. There's other things too. I'm not being specific here for various reasons. Conditioned consent. Now, because people think this, and I think, Mr. Waltera, you asked me about this. Women, if you are being abused physically or emotionally, that's grounds for an annulment. And you get out of that. Don't anybody think, well, the Catholic Church says marriage is sacred, so you better get back there and take it. Mm-mm. You get out, all right? Now, look, it's not like automatic, and you know that. If there's issues in families and somebody's being physically or emotionally abused, there's processes, right? Usually family members are involved. You get to a safe place. There's counseling. There might be, periods where you go back and try it again. You might be in contact with your minister. But let's just say in the end, when all efforts fail, you need to be safe, and that's grounds for an annulment. Why? Because you did not consent to that. You didn't marry this person with the consent that they were going to harm you.
Wait, does that go for men too? Or just
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know, it may sound sexist me saying the woman, but I guess a man could get emotionally abused,
Yeah.
easily enough. And if they're handicapped, this does happen. If they're handicapped, they can be physically abused. I've seen cases like that. Another issue for consent would be pregnancy. You got pregnant. Well, we were engaged anyway. We were going to get married anyway. Let's just go and get married. Well, that's not going to happen in the Catholic Church anymore. There's no pregnant brides. Why? Because we would say that reduces your consent. It's almost like you felt pressured to get married. And the chances of that marriage making it really gets thin. It can make it, but it gets very difficult. I mean, the percentages drop down. So if you were dating somebody and you got pregnant and went to the priest and said, we'd like to get married, he'd say, I'm glad to hear that. Have the child, come back a year later, and we'll start talking. In other words, being pregnant is not a reason to get married. That reduces your consent. So that would be another instance. And the last one on the lack of matter is defects of the will. Anything that you married against your will, anything that caused that you weren't entering into it freely, for whatever reason. There's all kinds of things that fall underneath this. You marry someone, 6 months later they tell you, look, I told your priest whatever he wanted to hear. We're not having kids. If you think I'm having kids, no way. That would be grounds for annulment, right? Very serious, too. The last one, oh, and by the way, remember what the material cause is. Mutual consent between the couple. If any of that's missing, there's no change. So anything that affects that, so you now know lack of matter is referring to it's missing the material cause. All right? Lack of form. Lack of form is the ritual. You did not follow the ritual as it was prescribed. So what could this be? You wanted your destination wedding in Hawaii. The priest will say, was this approved? No. So you just went and did it? Yes. You're Catholic? Yes. If that marriage doesn't work out and you want to get remarried, the priest is going to say it's just going to be a formality going through this. There was no marriage as far as the church was concerned, if you're Catholic, right? If you run off to the justice of the peace or such like that. Now look, if you get married, like you get pregnant, you want to be married, you marry the person, you went down to the justice of the peace, and then as time goes on, you would like to regularize this and be married within the church. There was a girl that didn't graduate too long ago was contacting me saying, I remember you teaching about this. I'd like to be married in the church. How do I do that? Well, that's great. All right. So so remember what you need: the husband and the wife, a priest or a deacon, and 2 witnesses. They'll go through the process like everybody else would, privately with the priest, and they'll probably just show up on a Tuesday afternoon, and they will then go through the proper form. All right. So if you
Wait, so you mean they were already married, but they just went through like the church they got married?
No, they were married by justice of the peace. Okay, but the person's Catholic, so that's the Catholic Church recognizes that's a legal marriage. They don't deny that.
What does that mean, though, justice of the peace?
Well, the justice of the peace is like the local magistrate. They're the ones that can perform marriage ceremonies and such, right? So a lot of times, if somebody just goes to the local judge, and the judge will marry them, you just show up in their courtroom and they reserve a time, and it lasts about 5 minutes. All right, there's an exchange of vows, and they have the authority to marry people. So some people go for that. Okay, so if a person's Catholic, the church recognizes they're legally married, but they didn't follow the proper form, so they're not sacramentally married. So if that marriage then fell apart, and then that girl meets somebody else, and now she wants to get married in the church, the priest will say, were you married before? Yes. Where were you married? At the JP. Are you a Catholic? Yes. Then it's just a formality. There was a lack of form. That's going to be annulled because the church never recognized it. They had to go through to make sure, but if all things being said, it's a lack of form. And again, it comes back to why at a liturgy. So let me kind of like end this on a good note. All right. When somebody wants to enter into this relationship, and you really want it to be lifelong, you really want it to be faithful, you really want it to be exclusive, you start from a different place. I know these things all sound like rules. Remember, I told you at the beginning of the year, everything sounds like a rule until you learn the meaning behind it. Once you learn the meaning behind it, you may not agree with it, but you get the reasoning, okay? So we're not in a good place in this country the way marriage is. Like, I've heard many LGBT advocates, and they're absolutely right. They're like, you won't let us get married, but half these marriages are crap. Well, they're right. But I don't think that's a reason to go around them, right? Because that would fall. If I followed that logic, it would be like me saying, I'm no longer going to tell the truth because, so many people lie. I mean, it doesn't follow logically, but I get it. So marriage, the LGBT community did not harm marriage. Straight people harm marriage. They ran it into the ground. We only think of it as whatever conditions that we want for it, and it's usually until death do we part. As soon as a little bit of financial problems, or if a person doesn't feel like they can express themselves, or you're holding me back, I'd like to move here, that kind of thing. And all of a sudden, we're not making decisions based on what? Mutual sanctification and mutual salvation. So could you imagine the last thing, if my wife dies before me, the last thing she could say to me that would be of value would be, you helped make me holy. It's because of you that I have salvation. it could be really nothing better than that. Mr. Walter, you have your hand up?
Can defective knowledge be like the person acted a whole different way?
Well,
before you guys got married and
it-
then just like completely changed?
Depending, maybe. You know, well, and I'm telling you where that would come into is in it. There are instances of immaturity. Let me explain that.